So good afternoon, everyone. This is Leslie Berry I'm introducing. She's in the cell to my right. I don't know where she is on your screen. I have never met actually Leslie in person, but I grew up down in the Belvedere and Tiburon area in the Bay Area where my parents still live. And so I get a copy of the local newspaper there. And there was an article about her new book, which she's going to tell us about. Sounded fascinating, both the story behind it and the book that she's written. And so I contacted her and asked her if she'd be willing to speak to our club, and she consented to do that. So I will count on her to provide any further background. And Leslie, take it away.
Well, thank you, Greg, and thank you for reaching out. It's a real privilege. I think, let me see if this is accurate. I think you are my first California group that I've been speaking to. Um, it's been quite an adventure launching a book in a pandemic, and just a quick summary of the process, the adventure I've been through doing this. I think it was in April, my publisher called. I wasn't supposed to launch this book till December. In April, he called and he said, hey, because of the pandemic and the shut-in, would you like to go ahead and launch your ebook? I said, sure, why not? I had no idea what I was doing or what I was agreeing to. But I launched the ebook back in April. And then actually, I was just telling Greg, I just launched the paperback this week. But the point of that story is I was so overwhelmed about how to launch this. And I said, you know what? I'm going to start where the book takes place in Newark, New Jersey. And I started reaching out. And at that time, nobody barely knew Zoom. I mean, some of my first Zoom things, we're all like talking over each other and everything. So I started building this following in Newark and then New York and in Florida. And so I hadn't really focused on California. And so you guys are my first California Zoom book talk. So very honored to be here. Um, as Greg said, I live down in Tiburon now, but I come from the East Coast. And I grew up in Maryland, but my mom grew up in Newark, New Jersey, and she's still going strong. She's 95 years old. She came from an immigrant family, a Jewish family that escaped from Russia early 1900s. She had four older brothers, and they all lived in the melting pot of our country at the time. And growing up, my sisters and I heard all these stories from her and my uncles and cousins about the horrible times, of course, the depression and the war and the pandemics back then and all of that. And we never really listened that closely to all those stories. Um, but there was one that at her 90th birthday that we all celebrated, that we all zeroed in again and said, wait a minute, we kind of remember you telling that story. And it was about her older brother, Harry, my uncle, who was a Jewish boxer at the time, back in the 30s. And he was a Golden Glove champion. There's a newspaper article about him and everything. And we'd all seen that article growing up. But what they all started talking about, my mom and her cousins, was about how Harry used to go out and punch the Nazis. And we were like, well, what we mean over in Germany, right? During the war. They're like, no, no, no. During the Depression in Newark, New Jersey, there was a group they called them the Newark Minutemen, because there were a bunch of boxers that at a minute's notice, they could be rounded up and called out and go put down what was a Nazi party that was being created in our country. And I had never really zeroed in or heard about this story. And what I want to do, because I think it's great it's this video that I saw that compelled me to gather this family story together. And so I sometimes wait for this video, but I think I want to jump in to set the stage for what was going on at the time. And this is all true footage that you're going to see. So this was chilling to me, and I'm going to jump right into it. Where's my share screen? Okay. Whoops. Sorry. Okay. So this is everybody got that? This is just my website. we can look at these pictures later, but I'm going to jump down to the video. Okay, so this takes place before World War II, Madison Square Garden, New York, 1939, 6 months before Hitler even invaded Poland.
February 20th, 1939. Just months before Hitler invades Poland and ignites the deadliest war in history, thousands of Nazis gather for a rally at an indoor arena. But this isn't Nuremberg or Berlin. This is Madison Square Garden in New York City.
You all have heard of me through the Jewish-controlled press.
And the man speaking isn't a member of Adolf Hitler's inner circle. He's Fritz Julius Kuhn, a U.S. citizen and head of the German-American Bund, or Association.
Kuhn wanted a rally to celebrate George Washington's birthday. The first American fascist is what they called him. They signed a contract with Madison Square Garden. Said, okay, we agree. No swastikas, no anti-Semitic signs, none of that stuff. Of course, once the contracts were signed, those agreements went out the window.
This program was produced for the German-American Bund rally.
We love him for the enemies he has made. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Fritz Kuhn.
Kuhn then went on to deliver a very, very predictable and very, very typical National Socialist stump speech about racism and the Jewish conspiracy and the communists and how everybody's an enemy and everybody has to be alike.
We, the German-American Bund, organized as American citizens with American ideals and determined to protest ourselves, our homes, our wives and children against the slimy conspirators and the parasite hand of Jewish communism in our schools, our universities, our very homes.
Then, an unemployed plumber tries to silence the American Fuhrer.
That's terrifying.
It is.
So just to give you first the setting of what was going on in the country, there was, it started, well, it started in the 20s, but really in 1933, when Hitler was elected, it was sort of a triple bewitching hour. So you have Hitler being elected, you have our prohibition ending, and you have our depression, taking off. And there was an effort, and it was sort of a Hitler satellite. The America at the time was considered a Hitler satellite by the Reich over there, and they actually called us a colony. They called us the American colony, and they started building this party it was nationwide. They divided our country into three, and it was organized with this hierarchy, just like in Germany. There was an American Hitler at the top, the guy that you just saw, Fritz Kuhn, and he had his members, and then there were tens of thousands of cells around the country. They used our NRA to get free guns and to train.
Just the paperwork you gotta go.
They turned themselves into Fritz Kuhn did two really brilliant things. The first thing he did was, under the guise of Americanism, he created this extreme idealism that mirrored what was going on in Germany. And so, he said we're the higher race, we were taken advantage of, and we're gonna turn this back into America. And by the way, make America great. Mm-hmm. That was a quote he used. My nephew asked me, he goes, why did you steal that quote from Trump? I said, no. Anyway, so the second brilliant thing he did was he turned this organization into a corporation, and it was he had 6 companies under his corporation and became a profit corporation, and under one section he had a newspaper, under another section he had his army that he was building. He actually had a group called the ODs. It was a German term, but it was like their SS. And he trained these guys to guard him and to be ready for the day, they called it, der Tag. And then one of the other groups he created was he bought all this land across America in these different towns, and he created these Hitler youth camps and sent German American children, used the trained them in the ideologies that were going on. They all wore uniforms. They all spoke German. In fact, the one in New York, it was in Long Island. It came out later in the FBI documents that they had been raping the young girls in order to increase the Aryan population in America. That was their goal. So anyway, this is the setting that was going on, again, during the 30s. Remember, before World War II even happened, during our Great Depression. And there was, so it's interesting. One of the lessons I learned about the mafia back then was that in 1929, we know what happened. There was a crash, and the people that really had the money and the power were the mafia because of bootlegging. Well, what happened was, because of First Amendment rights, the government couldn't do anything about this rising party. So they went to the Jewish mafia. They went to Meyer Lansky, actually, who was the head of the Jewish mafia. And they said, look, we need your help. We'll pay you to put this party down, to disrupt them. We need your help going undercover to help us get information. And Meyer Lansky said, you don't need to pay me, you just look the other way. And he started a whole effort in New York that got a little bit out of hand. He got together a bunch of young guys, and then they had some bad press. So what he did was he went to his guy in New Jersey, whose name was Longy Zwillman. And Longy was the very powerful young guy. They called him the Gatsby of gangsters. He was very likable. My mom growing up knew him. She said they called him Robin Hood because he helped the neighborhood. And so they went to Longy's woman and they said, look, Longy, you have all these boxers, because the mob, had all the gambling going on. So they had all these boxers. Can you organize a group for us in an organized manner that when we need you, we can come to you and say, okay, deploy 100 guys, deploy 1,000 guys. So he had this group trained called the Newark Minutemen, and my uncle was one of them, that would go out, stop as sort of a resistance group, stop these German American protests that were going on, go undercover, and these guys helped to sort of thwart this party. So what I did was I took that whole setting, kind of like Titanic, and that's my whole backdrop of my story. And then I have these two characters, Yael and Krista. And Yael is a Jewish boxer, and Krista is the daughter of the German-American Bund. So it's a star-crossed, they fall in love, star-crossed love affair. That's obviously very complicated and a lot of conflict. And so you have them falling in love. You have Yael fighting the German-American Bund with the goal of bringing down the American Hitler. He ends up going undercover for the FBI to help do this, and then help rescue Krista from one of the German American camps. Whether she wants to come with him is another story, because obviously this is her family and her people, and that becomes very complicated as well. So so, you know, you've got mafia and Nazis and boxers and all the elements of a blockbuster movie, which I actually sold the rights to the movie and just released the book. It just came out, the paperback just came out on Tuesday. And it's being, I couldn't ask for more in terms of how it's being received. And obviously there's some relevance to some of this going on today as well. Some of these themes never go away, unfortunately. But so that's the story, and I'd love to, I'm so happy to share it with you, and I'd love to get any of your questions about my research or the characters or my family or whatever.
Well, thank you, Leslie. I would like to ask, who were the two main characters based on?
Great question. They're based on, so Yael is based on in 1936. When I started researching this, I became possessed, and I started going through all these thousands of FBI documents that, by the way, had just been released 8 years ago. And I started doing research on ancestry. And I found this, there were two brothers in 1936, John and Jim Metcalf. And John worked for the Chicago Daily News and Jim worked for the FBI. And they came up with this scheme with their editor to go undercover with the Bund and then write a story. And so they went undercover for 6 months and then wrote this 14-day story that started revealing all these activities. And I came across this story and I looked them up, the brothers up on Ancestry, and in little mice type at one of the bottom, it said that John's diaries were at Hoover Institute over at Stanford. So I'm like, well, that's interesting. I really didn't understand what, I had never really experienced those archives before, but I became a member, I went down, and there were literally 12 boxes of his handwritten diaries explaining unbelievable detail. And I contacted his son, and who's 80 now, we're like best friends. And he's like, use it, use all that stuff. I would love you to. And so there's an initiation scene, for instance, where Yael's being initiated into the SS. And it's the whole, how they stand and how they move and all the everything. And I've used all those details to make it sort of as rich historically and accurately as possible. And, you know, used a lot of the other information as well. So that's Yael is really he's a couple characters, but that's the main character that he's based on. The girl is based on a girl named Helen Vrurus, who was one of the girls at the camp that was raped. And that she testified in FBI and other Senate hearings about that. That's all documented. And there's also, I found this in the archives actually, because I couldn't find it anywhere else, but there's an article in this newspaper, and it reminds me a little bit of an Inquirer type newspaper, but knowing that I have the facts too, a lot of it's real, but it's dramatized, and it's her whole story about how these officers abused her and got the other boys to abuse other girls in the camp. So those are my two main characters. And then my Uncle Harry is Yael's buddy. So that's kind of real. And then I try to bring in my family as some of the characters. And then most of the other characters are real. Fritz Kuhn's real, Longy's woman is real. And the way I did the book, actually, it's 4 narrators. So it's Yael, Krista, Longy, and Fritz Kuhn. And people kept telling me, don't do that, don't do that, don't do that. And I was so intent on, I wanted both perspectives to be seen. And I wanted somebody to be, you know, we know the punchline in the end, so we know who we're rooting for. But, you know, Longy's woman's a gangster. Fritz Kuhn is the American Hitler. They're both bad guys. But I wanted empathy on both sides, and I wanted you to be able to see. And in fact, I was talking to the son of a gangster last night. All these people have contacted me, but he's like, you know what? We meaning the old gangster guys, we really love your book because these old stories are told over and over and over again. And you've personalized Longy. You've made him a person. And, you know, a lot of it's through anecdotes or my own imagination, but I'm very happy that I hopefully people think it works, but I'm really happy that I approached the book that way.
Leslie, we missed the beginning. What was the name of your book again?
Oh, well, I'll be commercial. Newark Minutemen.
North Minutemen.
Newark.
Newark.
Newark, New Jersey, Minutemen.
Yeah.
Yeah. So hopefully that's an okay name.
Hey, Leslie, of course it's an okay name. So that video you showed in the beginning was frightening.
Chilling.
Yeah, really. And had the narrator not said, you know, this is Madison Square Garden, I would have thought of course it was in Germany. So how did a small group, apparently very small group of boxers, overcome such a massive and building swell of force there?
Well, so a great question. So back then, New York too, but Newark, I discovered, was this incredible melting pot of, I guess it was the overflow from New York, right? Of all these different ethnic groups, right? Italians, Jews, Germans, Poles, Russians. And the biggest efforts and the biggest, you know, plans, that's where it all came in. In fact, this was shocking to me. Fritz Kuhn, my mom grew up on, it was called, there were two streets she grew up on, but one of them was Nye Avenue. And I started researching, and it was incredible that Fritz Kuhn had a New Jersey office on Nye Avenue. She did, I mean, nobody knew that, but we were able to find that. So I think part of the answer is that was where the ground zero was. New York too, but Newark was this crossroads, this melting pot, and you know, this stuff went on in other cities too. I mean, there's a book coming out about Hollywood. So San Francisco had its own group, LA had its own group, but I think the biggest efforts were there. In fact, there were 3 camps in New Jersey, a couple in New York, and to directly answer your question, though, I mean, a lot of the stuff isn't published. You really have to dig or hear anecdotes. But so what they would do is when they called the Newark Minutemen, they would give them $100. And back then, that was a lot of money. You had hundreds and hundreds of guys if needed. I mean, you look at, if you can go online and look more at that Madison Square Garden event, 200,000 people showed up. And so part of it was a build, you know, they would go and put down different events, and it all built to that one event. And I think it backfired on Fritz Kuhn, because when you have 200,000 people coming to protest your event, it puts you on the map. And then it all tumbled for him. And he ended up actually going to jail for tax evasion. And that was some of the efforts of the undercover things. But well,
there were a lot of famous people in the Bund as well. The Lindberghs famously were in the Bund, as were a lot of the social elite in the United States, who were aligned with pieces of this story, and that actually showed to be, you know, there was no there. It was all hat, no cattle, as we say in Texas.
Mm-hmm. Well, actually, you're totally right. And one of the big questions back then was the Bund tied to Hitler or not? And I ended up doing a lot of research. My conclusion is yes. And one of the most compelling research I did was this guy he was a social studies teacher. And in the 1970s, he found out about these camps that had happened, and he quit his job and he went around and he interviewed all the kids who had been at the camp. And one of the big things he found out was that it was the president of Chase Bank and another president of a huge bank. He followed the money trail. And it was at that level of people in America that were sending money back to Germany through some of these organizations. So yeah, and there's a book and a TV series. I don't know if any of you all saw Plot Against America. That's sort of I always say mine is the prequel to that, but that takes place in 1940, and that's an alternative history novel where Lindbergh, as you say, Robert, he becomes president versus Roosevelt. And yeah, we were so close. We were really, really close.
Hey, Leslie, my name's Cindy. It's nice to meet you.
You too.
I read your book. I really enjoyed the 4-character perspective. It was
Thanks.
phenomenal. So Harry in your story is actually your great-great-grandfather, correct?
He's my uncle.
Your uncle.
Yeah, yeah. I grew up with him. I knew him.
Okay. Was his role pretty accurate within your book as being so close to this combined character, Yael, and going in, and I don't know if he was the one that was shot. I can't remember because all those characters.
Yeah, I mean, some of them, and my mom, we won't give the end away, but my mom got really mad at me for the ending because that part's not true, but we won't give it away to everybody else. But you know, Yael is made up. So I would say that was Harry's life. I don't know if he actually went undercover. They all kind of helped out. I mean, I can tell you that they lived right across from the candy store. If you ever hear the term candy store, what it really means is in the back, that's where all the mafia used to meet and play cards and do their stuff. So he was involved in that life, and my mom's brothers were as well. A lot of what they did as young boys was run the numbers or box and that kind of stuff. And the barber in the story was my mom's cousin. He used to cut Longy's hair, and his son is still living. And he said he remembers as a little boy all the mafia coming over and playing with him. And so I think the answer to your question is that was his life, but because Yael and Krista are made up, the interaction with those literal characters was not true. That was fictionalized.
Thank you.
Yeah, but Cindy,
Really
thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Wow, somebody read it.
I will when it gets here. Yeah.
No, I mean, it's been amazing. My publisher is so happy. They gave me some numbers. They're like, you're on your way. So it's good. Yeah.
Excellent. Well, I'll look for a signature inside my book when I
totally
make my way down there.
Yeah, I'll drop some off for your parents if you want to.
I did the Kindle, so.
Kindle, okay.
I thought about it, but I thought I want her to sign it, and she can't sign the Kindle.
Maybe I can get a signed copy too.
Definitely, any of you all. And if you want to be in the movie, let me know. I did this one for it was a Jewish congregation, and the rabbi, he's so funny. He texts me. He goes, "If you need a rabbi, remember I'm the rabbi for the book or for the movie." Yeah. But had any of you heard any of this before? Any of this kind of, Robert? Yeah.
Not in this country. I mean, I moved here from the UK, and it's just so alien for me, try to comprehend that amount of larger gathering of people.
Yeah.
It just seems.
Please feel free to, my website is newarkminutemen.com, and I try to put pictures up there, but they're all so chilling of, the Nazi flag draped over George Washington. And the most chilling ones are the children marching with the flags, swastika American flags side by side. But no, and in fact, Jenny, the production company that's doing the movie, the Fulwell 73, there are 4 guys from the UK, and the 5th partner is James Corden, and that's the US part. But I have had to emphasize with them so much that in America, like you said, in Britain, people like expect it or whatever. It's part of the memory. I kept, because they kept saying, well, that's not really shocking that the Nazis were walking around. I'm like, no, you don't understand. In America, that is so shocking. We just never pictured that. We think that's made up stuff or dystopian stories.
Well, I think we all knew about Lindbergh and his leanings, but it stands to reason that he wasn't the only one.
Right, right.
But we heard about these masses. I mean,
well, and the thing is how organized it was. I mean, right. I have this one, it's pictures of a book, but the organization is just incredible. I don't even know if our own army has that kind of organization. I mean, just like detail by detail on how you hold your hand and salute and approach and the holidays and
it just go up to Idaho, some of the Midwestern states, down in New Braunfels, Texas, and you'll see there are still families that obviously are not very empathetic to Jews, feel that there is a background in this country that is, not American and controlling everything. It's a dystopian vision that's promoted by parents, and it goes back generations.
Yeah, and it does go beyond Jews too. I mean, the Fritz Kuhn, he very clearly, if you can go find some of this complete footage, the footage I showed you was edited out, but if you Google it, you can actually find hours of this footage. I think Steven Spielberg has it in his one of his archives, but he literally said Jews, blacks, homosexuals, cripples. He went through anybody that wasn't, I guess Aryan or however he classified himself.
We have a gentleman in our local community, Leon Malmed, who survived the Holocaust. He lived outside of Paris with his family, and he was 6, I think, when his parents were taken away. And he and his sister survived the war and kind of expected at the end his parents would come back, but they had gone to Auschwitz and they were gone. Wow. And it was only relatively recently, that his wife convinced him he really ought to write a story, write his book. And so he's done that and has since spoken quite frequently. And the parallels that he draws between what's going on today and what was going on back then are terrifying.
Right. I mean, yesterday I just couldn't believe it. Yeah. And the whole parallel even of, I have a publicist and he said, the whole parallel of the guy undercover with the FBI. And so one of the things people ask me this, so I'll jump ahead and say it anyway, because to me it's important. But when I first started doing this book, it was really for my mom. And, every day, I talked to her every single day for like 2 years. She's like, oh my God, I've been, given this new gift of you talking to me again. But as I got deeper into it, I got to this whole thing about complacency, and that it was so clear back then that everybody was so scared to say something because, oh, we don't want to go back to war, or, that's too right, that's too left. And this whole thing about complacency. And I guess one thing I was glad about yesterday was that apparently somebody is watching, because our FBI was undercover and thwarted this whole thing. So that was encouraging, because I always ask myself, do we know what's going on under the, under the dirt here? And there's multiple organizations I've heard of that, don't believe in our system, I guess. So,
Well, Leslie, I first of all, I want to reach out and say thank you to Greg for reaching out to you. And as a result of Greg's due diligence there, we had you come give us the honor of your presence here today and hearing about your book. And not just the book, but the amazing story behind it as well. So thank you so much for your
thank
time.
you, Jenny. Thank you.
And I also wanted to point out that I wonder if we can share that link, whether Joe can do that or you can do that, Leslie, on our site, because I noticed that we were joined by Paula Peterson today. And first of all, I want to say hi to Paula. She is a former member of our Rotary Club, former past president, but she is also the owner of South Tahoe Now, which is a news media outlet. And I think, you know, knowing Paula, she'd be quite interested in continuing some dialogue with you and running an article on your book.
She had a very nice promo letting the community know that she was going to be with us today. Hi, Paula.
Hi.
There's her hat. That would be fantastic, Paula. Greg, I'll send you some links, and Paula, I would love to follow up with you.
Great. Thank you.
Just so you know, if any of you just want to casually do it, the website is literally newarkminutemen.com. So if anybody wants to, and there's a bunch of stuff on there, and I'm trying. One thing that's kind of fun is all these people are finding me and saying, oh, my uncle was a Newark Minuteman too. So I'm saying, send me pictures. I'm trying to create a whole gallery of these Newark Minutemen and sort of honor them as a group.
And how long, I had one actual question actually when you raised that. How long were they active for?
So 1933 seems to be the key year, because again, that's when all this stuff became really serious, when Hitler became chancellor or whatever he became first. And I created this whole timeline. And so that's when the Newark Minutemen started forming, and then it went all the way up to, it was after that event that you just saw where the Americans really started becoming aware. And, but I think it went up to the war, and then a lot of those boys went off to war, and there's some stories about them afterwards. But then they kind of disappeared in terms of the story. And we've asked why, and it goes everything from, well, none of them are living anymore, to the war kind of upstaged everything. And but I don't know why that whole period isn't taught in school, or we don't know more about it. It's curious to me.
Does somebody on the call have your email so we can exchange some information?
I do, Bob.
Share.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, please share, and I would love, keep in touch with me. I'd love to hear your reviews of the book and what you think, and if you're in Tiburon, stop by. So, but it was such a pleasure to do my California group. So I'm very excited. Thank you.